Here's the story of 6 buying experts who were very successful in their jobs, leading procurement offices across the country, from Alaska and PA to Arkansas.
All right, welcome to the Buying Bunch. Today we're going to talk about teleworking. Now, we know many private sector companies have been shifting to a more remote working environment for many years. And they've done that to generate cost savings, to create more operational efficiencies. Public sector has been behind the curve. They've experimented with that type of remote environment, but really haven't gone the same direction as private sector has. And a lot of the reason is because they're really paper driven. As we all know, that governments still rely on paper to get a lot of the work done. But all that changed in March with the coronavirus. And procurement offices around the country in March were forced very quickly to move to a remote working environment. And procurement leaders found that they had to find a way to remotely work with a lot of their team. They were working from home, and they had to figure out a way to make all of their processes work. So today we want to talk about, is teleworking here to stay? We know COVID-19 crisis is going to be with us for a while, and we want to talk about what do procurement leaders need to do to prepare for that? Is teleworking here to stay? What do we need to do looking forward? So I just want to start out talking about the general work environment. What are some of the challenges procurement leaders face if a large percentage of their team are going to be working from home long term? What do we think?
I think that it kind of comes down into two pieces. You have the logistics, how do you deal with technology? Like, what technology do they need that they don't already have? How do you compensate them for it? How do you track? We all have, governments have inventory tracking systems. How do you do that if you, give it to an employee? How do you collect it if they don't return to work? Things like that. Some offices, we talk about paper, still are hooked to a fax machine. And how do you keep track of what's coming in by fax? And I think it's the suddenness of all of this that has really, we didn't have time to think through it. So you have the logistics piece, but then you also have the workplace environment, the managerial piece of it. And it's really just a mindset change. We're hearing about, I manage some people. I don't know what they're doing if they're doing it from home, but it's not, it's really just a mindset change. Somebody working in a cubicle, how much do you actually know what they're doing in their cubicle? You're not standing over their shoulder, but now we have to be more thoughtful about, we can't just walk to them. We have to be more thoughtful about, maintaining contact, using technology like GoToMeeting. If we're hooked to a fax machine and a paper process, maybe it's time to think about electronic signature, electronic procurement, talk about physical bid opening. We've seen stuff on LinkedIn about that. So there's just a lot to think about. And I think it's just that jarring effect of one day, on Friday, everybody's at work. Monday, everybody's at home. We didn't really have time. Governments like to plan for things, and we didn't have time to plan for it. So now we're trying to, reverse engineer what we would have done, what we should have done.
Yeah, you're right. And technology does enable a lot of that, but you're right. We didn't have time to plan on it, but now it's forced upon us. So governments are going to have to figure out how to make that happen. And technology does enable that access, does enable the productivity and for collaboration like this. So, what are some other processes that we need to look at changing going forward? What are some other things we need to look at to get rid of that paper process, to make it more automated, to make it easier for those working from home?
Well, Mike, I think, Jason touched on it a little bit with EProcurement, and I think EProcurement becomes that universal platform that a lot of those activities are designed to move to migrate to. So whether an agency or a government has been using EProcurement or has recently adopted or has been forced to consider adoption due to the crisis, I think you want to look at e-procurement platforms as one of the key tools that allows public procurement to continue to do the work that they're doing. And there's a number of reasons behind that. I think first of all is certainly the ease of remote posting. I can bid my bid specifications from that end user easily. I don't have to talk, touch, or see them. They can get them to me. It's easy to get out there, distribute. It's easy to addend or change or update. Also, it really does start to level the playing field. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're a large conglomerate or a local mom and pop or a disadvantaged business or otherwise, your access to the bid information is absolutely controlled through the platform to be equal with everyone else. And I think there's a benefit to continuing to have local, small, disadvantaged businesses participate and then sort of ensure that they have the technology and tools to be full participants in the process. I think, we mentioned a lot of the physical sensations around regular procurement, bid openings, document trading. All of those processes can be moved to an e-procurement platform with relative ease. And I think in the background, the one requirement that most agencies will need to ensure that they've addressed is the legislative side. What do the rules say? What are the charter rules? What's the state law? And how do those impact the ability to fully utilize the tool that is e-procurement? Because I think really in a lot of places it has been used to post bids and collect maybe bid returns, but it is so much more robust than that and able to track, report, feedback to financial systems, and really develop a fully implemented tool for e-procurement that ensures procurement's processes are protected and executed per the rules and per the requirements of that agency.
Yeah, it's a great point, Jason, about the need to have some legislative change and relief. And I think we also need to really work with our attorneys and have them become really great partners and champions of change with procurement. I was really lucky when I was in Pennsylvania to have two great procurement lawyers, Gary Ankerbrandt and Chuck Anderson. But I know a lot of people aren't quite as fortunate to have lawyers who are very progressive. And we're going to have to look at our processes through a different lens. Like, for example, a lot of governments still require evaluation committees to meet in person and for the documents they look at to be in paper, and that they can't leave the evaluation committee room. It doesn't work now. And so we really, not only does procurement have to change, and I think procurement wants to change and is changing, but the lawyers who support us really need to be thinking about this very progressively.
And David, I was going to add, there's certain specific examples within the current crisis where a large metropolitan city in the Southeast had a previous rule of all RFP evaluation committees must meet in person to discuss, review, and score in a public meeting. They were able to move through their e-procurement platform into an online environment and conduct the same meeting successfully. So it can be done even on a quick turnaround.
And e-procurement systems too have the ability, because you need this sometimes as you're going through procurements, to house all the historical data that you might need to make decisions going forward, which is sometimes an excuse people would have to say why I need a file cabinet next to me, which you really don't anymore, because those systems can't house that data. So good. There's a lot of technology is out there now that can really do everything we need to do to work remotely. And it also enables this type of collaboration. To David's point about evaluation teams, they could get together just like we're getting together right now. This is a virtual conference room. They can get together and discuss the offers made by the suppliers, do their evaluation, debate the different issues around the offers, score, and it can all be captured electronically in a much more effective manner too. So very good. So, along those lines, I think we can all agree too that in addition to that internal communication that is important, and amongst each other, whether it be an evaluation team or whether it be walking down the hall, talking to a colleague, there's also that communication with external sources, which means suppliers. We all can agree that communication between suppliers and staff is invaluable in learning of new ideas, new concepts, in developing solicitations, and deciding on to use a cooperative purchasing vehicle. now that we're maybe working remotely for a long period of time or maybe permanently, will the effectiveness of these interactions be impacted if they're done by phone or by webinar versus in person? We know a lot of times those in-person meetings are very important, but I wonder what the impact of doing it this way will have on staff working remotely.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we can see just from these kind of calls that we have together as a team that you can communicate really effectively, maybe not 100% of your effectiveness, but probably in the 90-95%. And I think that's true for suppliers engaging with government procurement officials. I think that government procurement officials really need to resist the temptation of allowing the sort of closed office to be an excuse to shut off communication with the supplier community. Because as you said, Mike, that's so vital. If you aren't talking to your suppliers while you're creating a solicitation, you really aren't able to get a good perspective on what's happened in that industry since the last time you put the bid out. And you're going to end up with a procurement and ultimately a contract which doesn't best serve your end users if you're not getting that feedback from your suppliers. So I think we need to be creative, but I think, you know, shutting off communication with suppliers during this time is probably the worst thing that we can be doing in public procurement.
Yeah, and suppliers, like you said, may need to get, may need to look at their presentations and may need to change it a little bit for a virtual type meeting. But in reality, suppliers may be able to meet with more people over a webinar. It might be easier to get people together if you're a supplier through this manner, as opposed to try to get everyone in a conference room together. So in some ways, it might be easier and better because more people might be available this way too. So it might be easier to get people at the last minute because you don't have to travel somewhere and get people together. So it might be simpler in some ways. So that's yet to be seen, but I agree that supplier interaction still needs to happen, and I think it'll still be effective going forward. So let's shift a little bit. Judy, in higher education, I understand they've been shifting to more remote working environment for some time now. And so this won't be new to them if they have to stay working from home and they have to stay working remotely, which sounds like that might be the case. So what are some lessons that maybe government could learn from education as they transition to this new work environment?
Great. Thanks, Mike. You know, I'm listening to this conversation, and it's very similar in higher ed, really, the challenges. And I think it really depends on size of school. Many of them embraced e-procurement years ago, and so that part isn't new. But remote working is rather new to higher ed. When I talk to folks out in the field, when we go out and visit, a lot of them are just now starting to implement this notion of remote work. And it's really dependent on level of person. And unfortunately, I think the higher level people have been given that autonomy a lot earlier than some of the lower level staff. But what I'm seeing them do, and what I think is really important, is to outfit everybody to be able to work remotely. And they're doing that by establishing docking stations and laptops in lieu of the traditional desktop. And so people don't have that big computer sitting on their desk with a screen. They might have a screen and a keyboard that they can attach to a docking station, but everybody has the ability to take their laptop home and work. I spoke with somebody last week who said whenever they outfitted all the AP people to go home and start working, their productivity soared. And it wasn't that the volume was down yet. It was that they had some ability to control their work environment a little differently. And so they've seen a lot of success with it. And so I guess the lesson really is that this is not just for those that are at a higher level, that if you really empower people to do work at home in a way that they can be effective, you might find that they're actually more effective than they are at work. There's less distraction. They might get things done more quickly. So I think that's primary lesson learned, is to give everybody access to tools, and let's see how they do. Like, don't just think that you need to be, as Jason Soza said in the beginning, standing over their cube and watching them, because we're not.
Yeah. Some people that are working from home, you're right, Judy, you can be as productive, in some ways more productive, working from home. And all of us here now work from home, and all of us used to work in an office. Right. And I will tell you, in my case, I worked in an office for 23 plus years. And so at first it was an adjustment working from home in a lot of ways. And I think we can all agree to that. If you're not used to it, it's an adjustment working from home. But after you get used to it, you can be very productive, and you set your own routine and schedule, and you can get a lot done by working remotely. And I think a lot of people will figure that out. And you're right. Once you get all the tools there that you need, and you get everything set up, that you can be very productive.
Yeah, I should add one lesson learned very recently was that in order to get office supplies delivered to people's homes, there was this notion of having to add all these new delivery locations in e-procurement applications. And traditionally, it was a no-no, right? Only ship onto campus. You cannot ship anywhere else. And now they had to make this whole paradigm shift that, oh, by the way, it's okay, office, supplier, to deliver this stuff to these people's home addresses because they need it to work.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That I can see that being part of the future. So we've talked about a lot of different things that probably need to be addressed or looked at, but and we need to probably start looking at a lot of that right now. So Jane, if you had to kind of summarize what does procurement need to work on right now? What do they need to preparing for now? For a work environment, in a home work environment in the future? What are some of the things they need to start working on today?
Well, I think a lot of these things have certainly adjusted very quickly because of the coronavirus. And so, but I think we're going to step back a little bit and start really thinking long term. I know one of the things I miss most when I started working from home, because I'm like all of you, I was used to being in an office for years, is that brainstorming. And really the collaboration with that, but you do learn to work through that, and it's just different. So I think there's going to be a lot of different changes. I think we're going to step back and take a look at multiple things. I think the first thing we're going to have to look at is in changing of internal policies. What's that going to look like? If I'm going to work from home, am I allowed to take my chair from the office? Because my chair at home is not real conducive to 9 to 10 hours of sitting in it at the house. So, am I allowed to take that chair? What's going to happen when I leave? Jason mentioned, how are we going to get that equipment back? How are we going to track it? So a lot of these internal policies are going to have to take a look at that. Also, we're going to have to look at it from that legal requirement. And we've talked about it here on this video, that we've got to rethink what our requirements say, and how are we going to be able to do that virtually? Because we really don't want people in our offices, whether, we could give something to them or them give something to us. So there's going to be a lot of different things looking at these policies. And people ask, so where do we start? I think there are two really good places to start. One of them is there is a document out there called Working Remotely, a guide for the public sector, that was published by the Government Finance Officers Association. It really talks about a lot of different key things, like who is eligible, how are we going to do the risk management on this, what's the HR and payroll rules, how, if I'm sick, do I take a sick day, how does that work, using personal assets for business activities. And we know the security requirements for our government data is tremendous. How do we safely store all that data when we're working from home? There's much more in this brochure. I encourage you to download that, because it does talk a lot of things. It even talks about communication and morale, as David mentioned. How are we going to keep that up? Because we are social creatures, particularly in procurement. We love people. We love solving problems. So looking at that. The other one is the GSA actually has a guideline called Workforce Mobility and Telework Policy. And one of the things it addresses in there is, if I am required to come to the office, they have to give me 2 hours notice, because, I may not be prepared to drive in for a meeting at, that when the governor comes over or the mayor comes in. So there's a lot of different things. Both of these policies, I think, could be very beneficial to people. But then we're going to have to think about too, right? Funding. Funding's going to have to change, because funding today, as we all know, is really geared to set up all of our offices in our government buildings. But if that changes and we do more hoteling, so that we don't have a desk, we don't have an office, that we work from home, and then we have to come in for a meeting or for something else to do, then we're going to have to figure out how to do that. We've also got to ask for funding to make that happen. How are we going to provide enough assets for our employees that are working remotely? And not just IT equipment, but there's office products. I mean, there's things that we use all the time that we've got to have access to. And how are we going to be able to electronically access all those file folders? You know, if I want to get ready to post a new bid, but I want to go back and look at how we bid it last time, I need to be able to go look at that. So a lot of electronic software is going to be purchased. E-procurement's been mentioned. You know, having a central repository with that e-procurement system so that we can have access to things easily and quickly. So there's going to have to be funding for software. I know a lot of us have wanted e-procurement systems in the past, and wasn't a whole lot of budget or appetite for that, but I think that hopefully will change during this crisis. We're seeing how critical it is that we have access to a good e-procurement system and electronic documentation and signatures. And it's not just us in budgeting asking for it differently, but think about our governing entities, our councils, our legislatures, our boards. They're going to have to think differently, and when they see those budget requests, because they're going to be in different buckets of money. So I think there'll be changes on all sides of this equation as we look at budgeting. Then as we move from that paper-based process to automated, you know, if we ever wanted to kill paper, and we've all been moving that direction, I think the virus is going to help us kill it. It's going to help force the issue for governments to put that money in the budget so that we can move away from that paper. The biggest thing I think of when I think of paper is it has germs all over it. We don't know who's touched it. We don't know how many people have touched it. They could have sneezed and just touched that piece of paper before they handed it to me, whether that's coming from an internal source or an external source. We have got to be able to move past just accepting rudimentary electronic work, emails and other documents like PDF files. We've got to have a more robust way to share those documents, internalize those documents, and be able to modify them and push those back out. So I think it's going to be really interesting as we look at more work-life balance. How are we going to provide that for our employees? Because all of us that work from home, we know it's hard to shut it off. You know, we get emails, so it's hard not to look at emails, you know, at 9 o'clock at night, and then you're thinking about it all night. So I think there's going to be a real focus on life-work balance as we help our employees to be more productive.
Yeah, very good point. And especially about the funding. And I think there's never been a better time to justify getting upgrades in technology with e-procurement systems. Never a better time to justify putting that in the budget and saying, here's why we need it. It's a perfect time to do it. So I think, I think we've only scratched the surface here in talking about this topic, and I think it'll be an ongoing topic for many governments, and even higher ed will probably continue to have to tweak what they're doing around remote working. But there seems to be a definite consensus that more procurement staff will be working from home in the future. And while we all agree there's still a lot of work to do, a lot of thinking to do around how it can be done towards this permanent shift, the crisis has shown that it can be done. Procurement staff's been working from home now for over a month, maybe 6 weeks, and they're still getting things done. So it can be done. Organizations have shown that. And if we can get those policies changed, can get the upgrades in technology, can get the automation in place, all the things we talked about here, I think it'll do nothing but improve procurement going forward. And it'll improve the services to the departments, the agency, the end users, everybody that we serve as procurement individuals. So thank you very much.